There is a moment in Season 7 where Rick Sanchez finally gets the one thing he has wanted for decades. He beats the man who killed his wife to death with his bare hands. No portal gun, no genius solution, just Rick and the man who destroyed everything, and 30 years of grief finally having nowhere left to go. And when it is over, Rick just stands there. No relief, no peace, just a man with a body at his feet and no idea what comes next. That is what this video is about. Not the fight, but the 7 seasons of darkness that made that moment inevitable, and the question the show is honest enough to ask once it is over. Who is Rick Sanchez when he is no longer defined by what was done to him? We are going through his 10 darkest moments. 2 hours, 10 sections. One man and the wound he built a life around. Welcome to Ricktopus. Let us get into it. The origin of everything. Diane, Beth, and the bomb in the garage. There is a moment in Season 5 of Rick and Morty that changes everything you thought you knew about the show. Not a joke, not a twist played for laughs, a real moment, quiet and horrible, that reframes 7 seasons of a man drinking in a garage, dragging his grandson through the universe, and laughing at things that aren't funny. It happens when evil Morty scans Rick's brain and the memories spill out onto the screen. And for the first time, the show tells you the truth about who Rick Sanchez actually is. Not the genius, not the nihilist, not the guy who turned himself into a pickle. The man underneath all of that. The man who existed before any of it. And that man was happy. That is the detail the show buries so deep that most people never fully sit with it. Rick was not always the person we see at the start of the series. Drunk, untouchable, loudly insisting that nothing matters and nobody should expect anything from him. There was a version of Rick Sanchez who had a wife named Diane, a daughter named Beth, and a life he had chosen to build instead of escape. He was a scientist, yes. He was brilliant, yes. But he had decided, consciously, deliberately, that his family was enough, that the adventure of raising a child and loving a person was the thing worth doing. Rick Prime showed up and ended that. Rick Prime is the overarching villain of the entire series, and the show takes its time confirming this. For seasons, he exists only as a shape in the background, a mystery, a face Rick refuses to fully explain. But by Season 5, and then definitively by Season 7, the picture becomes clear. Rick Prime was another version of Rick Sanchez. He had already built a portal gun. He had already been traveling the multiverse, jumping from dimension to dimension, doing whatever he wanted. And at some point, he visited the garage of Rick C137, the Rick who is the main character of the show, and made him an offer. Come with me, see everything, leave all of this behind. Rick C137 said no. He said no because Diane was in the house. Beth was in the house. The life he had built was right there, and it was real, and it was his, and he did not want to abandon it for infinity. This is important. The man who would eventually become the loudest nihilist in the universe, the man who would spend years screaming that nothing matters, that love is a chemical illusion, that connection is weakness, chose his family over the multiverse when the choice was actually in front of him. Rick Prime did not take that well. He came back through a portal. He threw a bomb. And in Rick C137's garage, with no warning and no mercy, Diane and young Beth were killed. This is the confirmed canon origin of everything. It is shown in the memory sequence in Season 5's Rick Mirai Jack, validated by the information evil Morty pulls from Rick's brain scan, and reinforced throughout Season 7 when Rick Prime is finally found and confronted. The death of Diane and Beth is not a theory. It is not a maybe. It is the load-bearing fact underneath the entire show. And once you know it, every single thing Rick does, every drink, every dangerous adventure, every time he tells Morty that nothing matters, has a different weight to it. Because here is what Rick did after the bomb went off. He grieved. He fell apart. He spent years in the kind of pain that doesn't announce itself loudly. The kind that just empties a person out until there is very little left. And then, at some point, the grief turned into something that grief sometimes turns into when a person has enough intelligence and enough access to power. It turned into a mission. Rick built his own portal gun. He figured out interdimensional travel independently. The same technology Rick Prime had tried to tempt him with. The same technology he had refused. He built it not to see the universe. He built it to find the man who destroyed his family. He created a way to identify Rick Prime genetically, a kind of signature that would let him distinguish the right Rick from the infinite wrong ones, and he started traveling and killing. This is the part of Rick's origin that the show reveals slowly, across multiple seasons, because it is uncomfortable in a specific way. Rick C137, the character the audience has spent seasons with, laughed with, rooted for, murdered countless alternate versions of himself while searching for one specific one. The montage in Rick Mirai Jack shows shows it clearly. Rick moving through dimension after dimension, finding Ricks who didn't match the genetic signature and killing them anyway. Some of these Ricks had families, some of them had lives. None of that stopped him. This is not played as cool. The show does not frame it as a hero's journey. It is shown as what it actually is. A man so consumed by loss that he became something genuinely terrifying in the process of chasing justice. The other Ricks of the multiverse eventually banded together just to try to stop him. That collective effort became the Council of Ricks. The Council eventually became the Citadel, the massive, city-sized space station full of alternate Ricks and Mortys that appears throughout the series as one of its primary locations and one of its darkest institutions. The Citadel, with all of its cruelty and hierarchy and exploitation of Mortys, exists because Rick C-137's grief was so overwhelming and so violent that the rest of the multiverse had to organize against it. Rick did not build the Citadel. He caused it. He eventually gave up the search. Not because he found peace, not because he decided to move on. He gave up because he was exhausted and broken, and the hunt had taken decades, and Rick Prime was nowhere. The mission had eaten the man, and what was left was something much closer to what we see in Season 1. The drinking, the recklessness, the performance of not caring, than to the person who had once turned down the entire multiverse to stay home with his wife. So he found a dimension where Beth was still alive. Her own Rick, a different Rick, a Rick from that dimension, had already abandoned her, just left. Rick C-137 crashed his ship into that garage and walked in and pretended to be her father. Not her father, a replacement, a stand-in, a man living inside a life that was never actually his. That is the universe where the show begins. That is the family Rick is with at the start of Season 1. None of them are originally his. Now think about the detail of the AI. At some point during all of this, during the years of grief and the revenge quest and the slow collapse, Rick went back to his original dimension. The dimension where Diane and Beth died. He built a machine there and he programmed it with Diane's voice. Not to comfort himself, not to have something warm to come back to. He built an AI version of his dead wife that would call to him from the other room, always just out of reach, in a voice he would recognize, reminding him constantly of the day he failed to save her. This is confirmed in Season 6's Solar Ricks, when Rick is sent back to his original dimension and encounters this AI. The Diane AI tells him that Rick Prime must have also been reset to his home dimension by the same accident. It tries to pull Rick back into the hunt. Rick tells it that he is done, that he has a family now, even if it is not his original family, and that he is choosing them. The AI does not let him go easily. And this is the detail that matters most. Rick built a machine that sounds like his dead wife specifically to haunt himself. He programmed it to make him feel his failure. He placed it in the house where the worst thing that ever happened to him happened, and then he left. And he went to live with people he was pretending to be related to, and he drank, and he performed not caring, and he dragged a 14-year-old boy through dangerous dimensions. And somewhere, in his original garage, the voice kept going, calling from the other room, waiting. Rick Prime made that man. There is no version of Rick Sanchez that exists in the show without the bomb through the portal, the drinking, the nihilism, the desperate need to be the smartest person in every room, the walls he puts between himself and anyone who gets too close. All of it starts in that garage, with Diane and Beth, and a version of Rick who was not the one who caused it, but has been paying for it ever since. Rick Prime told him this himself in their final confrontation in Season 7's Unmortricken, right before Rick C-137 beat him to death. He said, "You are welcome. I made you. I showed you infinity." And the awful, uncomfortable truth at the center of all of it is that Rick Prime was not entirely wrong. The Rick Sanchez the audience knows, the character, the genius, the most dangerous being in the central finite curve, was forged in that grief. Without Diane's death, there is no portal gun. Without the revenge quest, there is no Citadel. Without the Citadel, the show, as it exists, does not happen. The thing that destroyed Rick is also the thing that created him. He has been trying to decide for 7 seasons whether that is something he can live with. There is one more layer to this that the show reveals quietly across multiple seasons, and it is perhaps the darkest of all. Rick Prime did not just kill Diane in one dimension. He killed her in all of them. The Omega device, a weapon Rick Prime invented specifically to deal with the growing number of Ricks hunting him for what he did to their families, erases a person not just from one reality, but from every reality that exists. He used it on Diane. Every version of Diane Sanchez in every dimension across the entire multiverse is gone. There is nowhere Rick could go to find her. No dimension-jumping solution. No alternate timeline. The woman is simply absent from existence across infinity because one version of Rick with a grudge built a machine to make sure she stayed that way. This is confirmed in Unmortricken. Rick Prime says it directly. So when Rick drinks, he is not drinking to forget forget a memory. He is drinking to survive a fact. Diane is not waiting somewhere. She is not living a good life in a universe he chose not to visit. She does not exist anywhere, in any form, except in an AI he built in an empty house to make himself feel worse. That is who walks into the garage at the beginning of Season 1. That is who hands Morty a portal gun and says nothing matters and let us go on an adventure. And here is what makes that almost unbearable to sit with once you know it. The show never hides it. It just buries it deep enough that the jokes can happen on top of it. Rick can be funny, and the adventures can be wild, and the absurdity can be relentless, and underneath all of it, the whole time, there is a man who lost his wife and daughter in a garage and has been trying ever since to build something, anything, that makes that fact feel survivable. He has not succeeded yet, but what he does with that failure, and how far it goes before the show is done with him, is where things get genuinely dark, because this was only the beginning. What came next was a man who learned to take his grief and use it as fuel, and fuel burns things. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What Rick did to himself, to the worlds around him, and eventually to his own grandson in the years that followed the garage and the bomb and the silence where Diane's voice used to be, that is a much longer, much darker story. And it starts with a world that no longer exists, a shovel, and two bodies in a backyard that should never have been there at all. Section 2. The Man Rick Became. The Revenge Quest and the Citadel He Never Wanted. Most people who watch Rick and Morty from the beginning assume the Citadel of Rick's is just a cool idea. A city made entirely of alternate versions of the same genius. A space station full of Ricks and Mortys from different dimensions, all living and working together, with their own government and economy and social structure. It shows up in Season 1, comes back in Season 3, gets its own full episode in the form of Tales from the Citadel, and by Season 5 it is ground zero for evil Morty's plan to break the entire multiverse open. It is one of the most creative things the show has ever built, and it exists because Rick C-137 was in so much pain that the rest of the multiverse had to band together just to survive him. That is not a metaphor. That is what the show tells you, directly, in Season 5's Rick Mirai Jack, when the memory sequence lays out Rick's history for the first time without hiding behind jokes or misdirection. The Citadel was not built as a community. It was not built as a government. It was built as a defense. A group of Ricks, watching one of their own tear through dimension after dimension, killing alternate versions of himself, decided that the only way to stop him was to work together. The Citadel came from fear, specifically from fear of Rick C-137. To understand what that means, you have to go back to right after the bomb. After Diane and Beth were killed in the garage, Rick C-137 built his own portal gun. This matters because at the time, only Rick Prime had that technology. Rick C-137 figured it out independently, which tells you something about the state he was in. Grief does strange things to people. For some people, it makes them stop. For Rick, it made him work. He built the one thing he had refused to build when it could have made him happy, because now it was the only thing that could get him close enough to the man he wanted to kill. He also built something else, a way to identify Rick Prime specifically, a kind of genetic signature, unique to the version of Rick who had thrown the bomb. With the portal gun and the identifier, Rick had everything he needed to start hunting, so he started hunting. The montage in Rick Mirai Jack does not linger on this. It moves quickly, the way traumatic things often do when someone is trying not to look at them directly, but what it shows is clear. Rick moving through dimensions, Rick finding alternate versions of himself, Rick checking the signature, and when the signature does not match, which it almost never does because the multiverse is enormous and Rick Prime is very good at hiding, Rick killing them anyway. This is the part of the story that does not get discussed enough. Rick C-137 was not only hunting Rick Prime, he was murdering innocent alternate versions of himself who had done nothing to him. Some of those Ricks had families. Some of them had their own Mortys, their own Beths, their own lives that were interrupted permanently because C-137 came through a portal in a state of grief so total that it had curdled into something else entirely. The show does not give these Ricks names or faces or full stories, but it is honest about what is happening. This is a man committing mass murder across the multiverse in the name of justice, and the show does not dress it up as heroic. The other Ricks noticed. At first, it was just chaos. A single Rick moving through dimensions, dangerous and unpredictable, leaving dead versions of themselves in his wake. But as the body count grew, the surviving Ricks started comparing notes, started realizing this was not random. There was one specific Rick doing doing this, and he was not going to stop. And a single Rick from any given dimension is already one of the most dangerous beings in existence. A Rick who has lost everything and has decided that nothing matters anymore except finding one specific face, that is something else. So they organized. Ricks from different dimensions started working together, which for a group of people whose entire personality is built around being smarter and more capable than everyone else is genuinely remarkable. They put aside the thing that defines all of them, the belief that they do not need anyone, because the alternative was getting killed by one of their own who had decided the rules no longer applied to him. That organization became the Council of Ricks. The Council eventually became the Citadel. And here is what the Citadel actually is, once you look at it clearly. It is a place where Ricks are in charge of other Ricks, where Mortys are treated as tools and second-class citizens, where the system grinds people down and rewards cruelty and punishes anything that looks like genuine feeling. It is, in other words, a place that reflects exactly what Rick C-137 was when he was at his worst. A version of a person who had decided that intelligence is the only thing that matters and that everyone else is just in the way. The institution that formed to stop the most dangerous Rick became a monument to his worst qualities. Rick did not build it, but it is his. In the way that things you cause are always yours, even when you never wanted them. The hunt eventually failed. This is the part of the story that is easy to miss because the show spends so much time on what Rick became that it can be easy to forget the thing underneath all of it, that he never caught Rick Prime during those years. He killed Ricks for decades. He burned through dimensions. He became the most feared version of himself in the entire multiverse, and Rick Prime was still out there, still free, still alive, either too clever to be found or simply lucky, moving through dimensions the way Rick himself would eventually learn to do, one step ahead of a man who had made finding him the only reason to keep going. There is a detail in Rick Murray Jack that is easy to walk past because the episode moves fast. At some point during the revenge quest, Rick C-137 encountered a younger version of himself inside Bird Person's mind. This younger Rick, before the bomb, before the grief, before all of it, looks at C-137 and says something that lands quietly but hits hard. When C-137 mentions his grandson Morty, the younger Rick says, "You are one of those people who moves in with an abandoned adult Beth." He says it like it is a known category of person, like it is a thing that happens enough that there is already a name for it, which means that by the time Rick C-137 gave up the hunt and went looking for a Beth to live with, he was not the first Rick to do this. Other Ricks across the multiverse had done the same thing, given up on whatever they were chasing and landed in the life of a Beth whose original father had already left. It is a pattern, a specific, recognizable failure mode for a Rick who has run out of road. Rick found a dimension where Beth had been abandoned by her own father. He crashed his ship into her garage. He walked in and let her believe he was her dad, and he started living that life, her family, her dimension, as if it were his own. The dimension he landed in is the one where the show takes place. The family he attached himself to is the Smith family. The Morty he took under his wing is not his grandson. He is the grandson of whichever Rick abandoned that Beth, a completely different person from a completely different branch of the multiverse. Rick C-137 just decided that close enough was good enough, because by that point, close enough was all he had left. This is confirmed by Season 6's Solar Ricks, which sends everyone back to their original dimensions when Rick accidentally resets his portal fluid. Rick ends up back in C-137, the empty dimension where Diane and Beth died, and Morty ends up back in his own original dimension, the one that got destroyed by Cronenberg's in Season 1, where his original father Jerry has spent years surviving alone in a ruined world. These are different dimensions. Rick's origin and Morty's origin are not the same place. The show makes this explicit. So the man who sits in the garage in Season 1, drinking and inventing and pretending none of it hurts, is carrying all of this. The grief, the decades of killing, the failed hunt, the knowledge that he is living someone else's life because his own was taken from him by a man he never caught. The Citadel, which exists because of him, humming out there in the multiverse as a permanent monument to what he became in the years after the bomb. And he tells nobody. He does not tell Beth. He drinks with her, encourages her worst habits, feeds her need for his approval, and never once sits her down and says, "I am not your father, and your real father left, and I moved in because I had nowhere else to go." He does not tell Morty. He takes the boy on adventures, uses him as cover for his genius brainwaves, teaches him things and breaks him and rebuilds him and breaks him again, and never once says, "You are not originally my grandson, and the world you come from is gone because I ruined it." He carries it alone, in the way that he carries everything, loudly on the outside, where the noise fills the room, and silently on the the inside, where the actual weight lives. The citadel that formed to stop him goes on without him. It becomes its own monster, running its own cruelties, grinding through Ricks and Mortys the way institutions always do once they stop being about the thing that created them and start being about their own survival. Rick eventually destroys it at the end of Season 3 with the same casual violence he brought to its creation. He does not seem moved by this. He has never seemed to think the citadel mattered. He caused it, he resented it, he destroyed it, and somewhere in all of that, across all those years of hunting and failing and finally landing in a garage that was not his, he became the person the show introduces in Season 1. The person who says, nothing matters. The person who says love is a weakness. The person who tells Morty to keep moving and never look back, because looking back is the one thing Rick Sanchez absolutely cannot afford to do. But the thing about never looking back is that it requires you to always be moving forward. And eventually, no matter how fast you run, the thing behind you catches up. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously, which is exactly what happens the first time Rick abandons a world completely. Not in the past, not in a memory, but right in front of Morty's eyes. In an episode that aired in Season 1 and changed what the show was allowed to be forever. Section 3, The First Abandonment. Cronenberg World and the Bodies in the Backyard. Most shows have a moment where you realize they are playing for keeps. A moment where the rules you thought you understood get quietly folded up and put away, and what replaces them is something harder and more honest and a little frightening. For some shows, that moment comes late, after seasons of build-up. For Rick and Morty, it comes in episode 6 of the very first season. 6 episodes in, before most people had fully decided whether they liked the show, before anyone had a reason to expect that an animated comedy about a drunk grandpa and his nervous grandson was capable of doing something genuinely devastating. The episode is called Rick Potion Number 9. It starts as a joke and ends as something else entirely. Morty has a crush on a girl named Jessica. This is established from the pilot. It is one of the most ordinary, recognizable things about him. The kind of detail that makes Morty feel like an actual teenager, rather than just a plot device. He asks Rick for a love potion, something that will make Jessica notice him, feel drawn to him, want to be around him. Rick makes it from vole hormones, which are chemicals that make voles, small animals, bond with their mates for life. He hands it to Morty, and Morty uses it at the school dance. Jessica has the flu. This is the detail that breaks everything. The love potion, when it makes contact with the flu virus, goes airborne. It spreads. Within a very short amount of time, every person on Earth who is not related to Morty by blood is infected. And the infection does exactly what it was designed to do. It makes them desperately, obsessively, completely focused on Morty. The whole planet falls in love with him at once. Rick tries to fix it. He makes an antidote from mantis DNA. This turns everyone into giant mantis creatures who want to mate with Morty and then eat him. Rick tries to fix that too. He mixes together DNA from a koala, a rattlesnake, a chimpanzee, a cactus, a golden retriever, a shark, and a dinosaur. Throws it all together and releases it into the air without fully understanding what it will do. He does this quickly, arrogantly, without real thought, because he is certain that being the smartest person in the room means his solutions will work, even when he has not properly tested them. The population of Earth turns into Cronenbergs. This is the word Rick uses. He says it himself, looking out over a city full of shambling, grotesque, barely human blobs with distorted faces and melted bodies. He named it after a director of horror films, because the mutations look like something out of a body horror movie. Every person on the planet, except for Morty's immediate family, Beth, Jerry, Summer, and Rick himself, has been turned into a monster. Not metaphorically, literally. The world is gone. Rick looks at this for a moment, then he says he has a solution. The scene cuts to the garage. The world is apparently back to normal. Rick and Morty are working together, relaxed, as if nothing happened. It looks like Rick fixed it. It looks like everything is fine. Then Rick asks Morty to hand him a screwdriver. Morty hands it over. Rick turns it 3 times. The machine explodes. Rick and Morty are killed instantly. The garage is covered in blood and burns and 2 very obviously dead bodies. Then a portal opens. The real Rick and Morty step through. This is what Rick's solution actually was. He scanned the multiverse until he found a dimension nearly identical to their own. Same world, same family, same everything, where an alternate version of himself had managed to cure the virus and save everyone. And then he found a dimension where that version of Rick and Morty died in a garage accident moments after saving the world. He took Morty to that dimension, stepped into the lives of 2 people who had just been killed, and handed Morty a shovel. Bury them, he says. So they do. This happens to the sound of a song called Look On Down From the Bridge by Mazzy Star. It is a slow, heavy, almost whispered song about hopelessness and distance and things that cannot be undone. The choice to play it over 2 people burying burying their own bodies in a backyard is not accidental. The music is doing something the dialogue is not. It is telling you how to feel about what you are watching, because Rick is not going to tell you. Rick is not going to acknowledge that this is horrifying. He digs and he stays quiet and he moves on. Morty cannot move on. The final shot of the episode is Morty standing in his new room, in his new dimension, surrounded by the possessions of a version of himself who was killed hours ago. He is staring at nothing. His face is the face of someone who just understood something about the world that they cannot unfind. Not a lesson, not a moral. Just the raw understanding that the place he came from is gone forever. That the family he grew up with is still back there in a world full of monsters. That his grandfather made a series of careless mistakes, and the cost of those mistakes is an entire reality. And that Rick's solution to that cost was to simply find a new reality and act like it never happened. The show does not give Morty a breakdown. It does not give him a speech. It just shows him standing there, and the song plays and the episode ends. This is the moment Rick and Morty became a different show than anyone expected. What makes it specifically dark, not just sad, but genuinely unsettling, is Rick's total absence of reaction. He has destroyed a world, not accidentally in the way that accidents happen to good people trying their best. He made a love potion he knew was ethically questionable. He rushed fixes he had not thought through. He released an untested airborne virus onto an entire planet without understanding what it would do. And then, when the consequences were too large to clean up, he found a workaround that required absolutely no personal cost to himself and total cost to everyone else. The Beth, Jerry, and Summer from Morty's original dimension are left behind. The show confirms this in a post-credits scene where they appear, still alive, still human, living in the Cronenberg world with no Rick and no Morty. Remarkably, the show plays this moment with a dark kind of humor. Jerry and Beth seem almost relieved. They are getting along better. The absence of Rick has removed a source of chaos from their lives. But the humor does not erase what happened. Those are real people in a destroyed world who were abandoned. Rick does not go back for them. He never goes back for them. This is the piece of Rick's behavior that the show keeps returning to across its entire run, in different forms and different scales. Rick does not fix what he breaks. He finds somewhere else to stand. He has been doing this his entire life, since the moment he gave up the revenge quest and landed in someone else's dimension rather than confront the wreckage of his own. The Cronenberg world is just the first time the audience watches him do it in real time, with full awareness of what is being left behind. The episode is also the moment the show defines what the multiverse actually means in this story. In a lot of science fiction, the multiverse is an exciting idea. Infinite possibilities, infinite adventure, a playground with no permanent consequences because there is always another version of reality to escape to. Rick and Morty takes that idea and shows you the ugliest version of it. The multiverse does not mean infinite freedom. It means infinite abandonment is possible. It means you can ruin a world and simply leave. It means the people you leave behind are still there, in the ruin, and the only reason you do not have to think about them is that you are no longer in the same dimension. Rick understands this better than anyone. He has been doing it longer than anyone. Season 6 brings this back in a way that makes the original moment hit even harder. In the Season 6 premiere, Solarix, a malfunction with Rick's portal fluid, resets everyone back to their original dimensions. Morty ends up in his original world, the Cronenberg world, the destroyed place Rick brought him from in Season 1 and never looked back at. And what Morty finds there is genuinely terrible. His original father, Jerry, has spent years surviving alone in a ruined world after losing Beth and Summer to the chaos. He is not the Jerry that Morty knows. He is harder, quieter, damaged in a specific way that the original Jerry never was, because the original Jerry had to learn to live inside a nightmare with no one coming to help him. Rick caused that. Rick caused every version of that. The Cronenberg world, the abandoned Jerry, the Morty who had to bury himself in a backyard at 14 years old. He caused it through carelessness and arrogance and the deeply held belief that his intelligence makes the consequences of his actions someone else's problem. And the show never lets him fully off the hook for it, even when he is funny, even when he is brilliant, even when he genuinely loves the people around him. The graves are still in the backyard. The Cronenberg world is still out there. The other Jerry survived and became someone harder and sadder, and Rick has never once gone back to check. What makes all of this connect to something larger than just one episode is the pattern it establishes. Rick Potion number 9 is not a one-time disaster. It is the first clear demonstration of how Rick operates when the cost of a mistake exceeds what he is willing to pay. He does not apologize. He does not repair. He relocates. He finds the version of the situation that allows him to keep keep moving. And he moves, and he expects the people around him to keep up. Morty kept up. That is the tragedy inside the tragedy. Morty stood in that room with the dead version of himself outside in the dirt, and he kept going. He went on more adventures. He stayed. Season after season, he stayed. And Rick, who had spent decades running from the wreckage of his own life, found himself with a grandson who did not run, who came back, who kept showing up in the garage no matter what happened in the last dimension they visited. That means something to Rick, even if he will never say so out loud. Even if he buries it under jokes and drinking and a performance of not caring so polished it has become almost indistinguishable from the real thing. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the performance has cracks, and the deepest crack, the one that reveals the most about who Rick actually is when the adventures stop and the garage goes quiet, does not happen on another planet or in another dimension. It happens at home, in the garage, alone. And it almost ends in a way that no one in the Smith family ever knew came close to happening. Section 4. The suicide attempt nobody talks about. Autoerotic assimilation. There is a version of this episode that most people remember. Rick runs into an ex. They party. Things get out of hand. Summer causes a race war by accident. The ex leaves. Rick comes home. End of episode. That version is not wrong exactly. Those things do happen in Season 2, Episode 3, Autoerotic Assimilation. But the version most people carry with them cuts off right before the part that matters. Right before the part that is, by any honest measurement, the single most quietly devastating thing the show had done up to that point, and one of the most honest things it has ever done about who Rick Sanchez actually is when nobody is watching. Here is what actually happens at the end of the episode. Rick comes home. Unity, the hive mind he spent the episode reconnecting with, the ex he clearly still had real feelings for, has left. Not in a fight, not dramatically. She left notes, written in different handwriting because she controls thousands of bodies and had each one write a word. The full note says, "Rick, forgive me for doing this in notes. I am not strong enough to do it in persons. I realize now that I am attracted to you for the same reason I cannot be with you. You cannot change. And I have no problem with that, but it clearly means I have a problem with myself. I am sure there is no perfect version of me. I am sure I will just unify species after species and never really be complete. But I know how it goes with us. I lose who I am and become part of you. Because in a strange way, you are better at what I do without even trying." Rick reads this, or some version of reading. He absorbs it, standing alone in the middle of a planet that an entire civilization used to live on before Unity took it over. And now he is the only one there because Unity has gone and taken everyone with her. He comes home. Beth and Jerry are waiting for him. They have discovered the alien Rick had chained up in a secret room under the garage, a creature Rick had been keeping there, apparently for a while without telling anyone. Beth tells Rick the alien has to go. She is firm about it. Rick does not argue. He does not make a speech. He does not pull out a device or change the subject or turn the situation into something he can control. He just agrees, quietly, without the usual performance. That alone is a signal that something is wrong. Rick goes to the garage. He does not drink himself into unconsciousness, which would be the expected move, the familiar move, the move the audience has seen enough times to find almost comfortable. Instead, he goes to his workbench. He takes the alien out of storage, a deformed, suffering creature that he had been keeping frozen. The show does not explain what this creature is or where it came from. What matters is what Rick does next. He comforts it. Rick Sanchez, who tells anyone who will listen that feelings are pointless and connection is an illusion and caring about things is a weakness you cannot afford, sits with a suffering creature and is gentle with it. He is on the verge of tears. Then he vaporizes it with a death ray. He is putting it out of its misery. And the gentleness he brings to that, the care with which he does it, is the most unguarded Rick has looked in the entire series up to this point. Then he turns the death ray on himself. He passes out before it fires. The machine is not fully charged yet. He slumps over his workbench, unconscious, flask still in hand, and that is where he stays. Not for an hour, not until someone finds him, for the entire rest of the night and into the next morning. The episode ends with the camera pulling back slowly, widening out to show the garage. Rick passed out at his desk, and outside, through the garage door, Jerry happily hitting weeds in the driveway with a weed whacker. Cheerful, completely unaware. The song playing over this is Do You Feel It by Chaos Chaos. It is a slow, aching song. One of the lyrics is, I am not afraid to die. The show lets it play over the image of a man who just tried to kill himself while his family went about their mourning. And then the episode ends. No one checks on Rick. This is the detail that the show plants so deliberately it is almost unbearable once you see it. Beth knew Rick came home in a bad state. Jerry knew. The kids were in the house. And not one of them comes to the garage. Not one of them knocks. Not one of them asks if he is okay. The world keeps moving. Jerry does his yard work. The sun comes up, the day begins, and Rick is slumped over a death ray he almost used on himself, and no one knows. And the show makes sure you understand that no one knowing is not an accident. Rick built this situation. Not the specific night, he did not plan to almost die in his garage, but the larger condition. He has spent years making himself impossible to reach. He performs invulnerability so consistently, so completely, that the people around him have stopped looking for the cracks. Beth does not check on him because Beth has never been allowed to check on him. She has been trained by years of living with him to accept that Rick does not need anyone. He taught her that. He taught everyone in that house that. And on the one night when that lesson almost got him killed, it held perfectly. Now think about what Unity's letter actually said. She did not leave because things were bad. She left because she recognized something specific, that when she is around Rick, she loses who she is and becomes part of him. She said he is better at what she does without even trying. Unity's entire existence is built around making other things conform to her. She assimilates, she unifies, she takes over. And she looked at Rick and recognized that he does the same thing, just without a hive mind, just through presence and personality, and the sheer gravitational pull of being the most certain person in every room. Everyone who gets close to Rick becomes, in some way, organized around Rick. Beth's entire sense of self is tied to her father's approval. Morty's entire life has been rerouted by Rick's adventures. Summer has reshaped herself repeatedly based on what Rick seems to need from her. Even Jerry, who resists Rick more than anyone, defines himself largely by his opposition to Rick. Rick does not mean to do this. The show makes clear it is not a conscious strategy. It is just what happens when someone with that much certainty and that much pain moves through the world. Everything nearby starts orbiting them. Unity saw it and left because she loved him enough to know she could not survive it. And Rick, who had just spent an episode pretending that the relationship was fun and casual and fine, came home and tried to die in his garage. The show asks you to hold two things at the same time here, and it does not make it easy. Rick is genuinely funny in this episode. The scenes with Unity are wild and entertaining. The race war Summer accidentally starts is absurd and played for laughs. The episode works as a comedy, and then the last 2 minutes happen, and you realize the comedy was sitting on top of something much heavier the whole time, and the weight was always there, you just were not looking down. This is what the show does with Rick's darkness more than almost anything else. It hides it in plain sight. It lets you laugh your way to the edge of something real, and then it shows you the real thing without warning, and it does not tell you how to feel about it. The music plays, the camera pulls back, Jerry whacks his weeds, and you are left sitting with the fact that one of the most beloved characters in animated television just tried to end his life, and not a single person in his family noticed. The other element of this episode that matters, that feeds directly into everything else the show builds about Rick, is what Beth and Jerry are doing in the B story while all of this is happening. They are in the garage earlier in the episode, arguing about their marriage, and an alien Rick had chained up, Blimblam, breaks free and delivers a speech to both of them. He tells them they are both terrible. He tells them they hate themselves and each other, and then he says, "Good luck with your terrible marriage, and I am sorry Rick has to deal with either of you." This is played as a joke. Blimblam is an alien baby eater making a speech about human relationships, which is absurd enough to be funny. But underneath the joke is something the episode is quietly serious about. The idea that Rick, for all his damage and all his cruelty and all the ways he makes life harder for everyone around him, is also surrounded by people with their own serious problems. Beth's relationship with Rick is not healthy. Jerry and Beth's marriage is not healthy. The whole family is a system of connected damage, and Rick is not the only source of it, even if he is the loudest one. None of that changes what happens in the garage at the end. Rick's damage is still his. The night is still his. The death ray pointed at his own head is still his. But it adds something important to the picture. The understanding that Rick is not falling apart in isolation. He is falling apart inside a family that is also struggling, in a house where everyone is performing a version of fine that nobody actually feels. And the performance is so good and so consistent that even a genuine crisis can happen inside it without anyone noticing. Rick survived that night because he drank too much and passed out before the machine was ready. That is the only reason. The next morning, the show implies, he woke up at his workbench and got on with things. No conversation, no acknowledgement. He folded the night up and put it away the way he puts everything away, behind the drinking and the arrogance and the relentless forward motion of someone who has decided that stopping means feeling, and feeling is the one thing he genuinely cannot handle. But he survived. And the question the show spends the next several seasons slowly building toward is what a person does with a survival they did not entirely choose. What it means to keep going when going was not exactly the decision you made. Rick does not answer that question with with honesty or openness or anything that looks like growth, at least not at first. What he does instead is perform, louder, bolder, more reckless. He doubles down on the version of himself that the world can see and lets the version underneath stay buried. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Until the Galactic Federation comes, until a wedding turns into a trap, until the one moment in the show where Rick does something genuinely selfless and then immediately makes sure no one is allowed to see it as that. Section 5. The Surrender, the Wedding Squanchers, and what love actually looks like for Rick. Bird Person is the only friend Rick ever had who the show treats as completely real. Not a tool, not a temporary alliance, not someone Rick keeps around because they are useful or because they owe him something. Bird Person is shown across the series as the one person outside of the Smith family who actually knows Rick, not the performance of Rick, not the genius or the nihilist or the man who turned himself into a pickle, but the person underneath all of that. He knew Rick when Rick was younger. He knew what Rick was like before the armor got this thick, and he is the one who tells Morty in Season 1 what Rick's catchphrase actually means. Wubba lubba dub dub. Rick says it constantly in the early seasons. It sounds like nonsense. It sounds like the kind of thing a cartoon character says to be memorable and weird. Bird Person tells Morty that in his people's language, it means, "I am in great pain. Please help me." Rick has been saying this every episode, out loud, in front of everyone, and it took a translation for anyone to hear it. Bird Person dies at his own wedding. Season 2, Episode 10, The Wedding Squanchers, is the Season 2 finale. Rick and the entire Smith family travel to the planet Squanch for the wedding of Bird Person and Tammy, a woman who had previously appeared as a friend of Summers, a teenage girl who went to parties and seemed entirely ordinary. At the wedding, in front of everyone, Tammy reveals that she has been an undercover agent for the Galactic Federation the entire time. She was never a regular girl, she was planted. Her entire friendship with Summer, her entire relationship with Bird Person was a long-running operation to get close to Rick through the people he cared about. She shoots Bird Person. He dies at the altar. The Federation troops pour in. Rick and the Smiths run. They escape the planet and spend a sequence jumping from world to world, trying to find somewhere safe to land, somewhere the Federation has not already reached. Each planet they try is either taken over or immediately overtaken the moment they arrive. There is nowhere to go. The Federation is everywhere. And then, Rick overhears something. Jerry, standing slightly apart from the group, says to Beth and the kids that they should turn Rick over to the Federation, that Rick is the one they want, that if the family hands Rick in, the Federation will leave them alone and they can go back to their lives. He is not saying it cruelly. He is scared. He is a person who has been dragged into an intergalactic crisis because of his connection to Rick, and he is looking for a way out for his family. But he says it. He says they should give Rick up. Rick hears every word. What happens next is the most important thing Rick does in the entire second season, and possibly one of the most important things he does in the whole show. He does not argue. He does not get angry. He does not build a weapon or talk his way out or find some brilliant solution that makes him the hero of the situation. He walks away from the family. He contacts the Galactic Federation. He turns himself in. He goes to prison. The show plays this over a cover of the Nine Inch Nails song Hurt. If you know the original song, a song about pain, about self-destruction, about looking at your life and not recognizing it, the choice of music is not subtle. The last image of Season 2 is Rick being processed into a maximum security Federation prison, surrounded by alien guards while his family watches the Federation take over Earth. It is a quiet, heavy ending for a show that is usually loud and chaotic. The season just stops there. Rick is gone. Rick is in prison, and the audience had to wait to find out why. Season 3 complicates it. In the Season 3 premiere, The Rick Shank Rickdemption, Rick escapes from prison through an elaborate plan that he executes from inside his own mind. While being interrogated, he pretends to give the Federation access to his memories, including the memory of how he invented the portal gun, while secretly feeding them false information and using their own technology against them. He destroys the Galactic Federation from the inside. He collapses their economy. He gets out. And then, in the garage, he pulls Morty aside and tells him the truth, or a version of the truth. He tells Morty that the surrender was not a sacrifice, that it was all a plan, that he engineered everything, including Jerry's suggestion that the family give him up, to get Jerry out of the picture. Because Jerry telling Beth to abandon Rick is exactly the kind of wedge Rick needed to finally push Jerry out of the family. Rick says that getting Beth and Jerry to separate was the real goal. The prison was just a step. He says this with the same energy he uses for everything else. Fast, confident, slightly manic, framed as a victory. But here is what is true and what is not true in that speech. It is true that Rick is smart enough to have planned multiple steps ahead. It is true that the Federation's collapse and Jerry's exit from the family both happened as a result of Rick's actions. It is true that Rick being being Rick, the idea that he calculated several moves ahead is completely believable. What is also true is that Rick heard Jerry say the family should give him up, and in the moment after hearing that, he surrendered. He did not wait to construct an elaborate plan. He did not pause and calculate. He walked away from his family and turned himself in. And the show makes it clear that his immediate motivation, the thing that moved his feet in that direction, was the understanding that his presence was putting people he loved in danger. Both things can be true. Rick can have genuinely acted out of love in that moment and also constructed a story afterward that reframes the love as strategy, because love is the thing Rick cannot afford to admit to. The surrender can have been real, and the explanation can be a cover. Not because the cover is entirely false, but because it is safer. It is easier to tell Morty that the whole thing was a plan than to say out loud that he heard Jerry's words and decided, in that instant, that the people in front of him mattered more than his freedom. Rick chose prison to protect his family, and then, when he got out, he immediately built a story that made it look like he never needed protecting anyone at all. This is the pattern. This is the thing the show keeps returning to across every season. Rick is capable of genuine, real, costly love. He demonstrates it in actions, in the surrender, in the years he spent trying to avenge Diane, in the way he cannot actually leave Morty even when he tries, in the AI he built in his old house to punish himself for failing to save his wife. The love is there. It has always been there. But the moment it surfaces in a way that someone else could see and name, Rick covers it. He buries it under a speech, a joke, a revelation that reframes everything as clever rather than feeling. Bird Person understood this. The translation he gave Morty, "I am in great pain, please help me," was not just a fun fact about alien languages. It was Bird Person telling Morty everything he needed to know about Rick in one sentence. Rick announces his pain constantly. He does it in a language nobody around him speaks, which is either a tragedy or a choice, and the show is honest enough to suggest it might be both. Bird Person also comes back. After being shot at the wedding, he is not simply dead and gone. The Galactic Federation resurrects him as a weapon, a cyborg soldier called Phoenix Person, built from Bird Person's body and filled with Federation programming. He becomes one of Rick's enemies. In Season 4, Rick has to fight his best friend, now a machine pointed at him by the organization that destroyed his life. Rick fights him. He wins. And at the end of the fight, damaged and exhausted, Rick tries to revive Bird Person, tries to bring him back, to undo what the Federation did to the only person who ever really knew him. Bird Person's systems reject it. The revival fails. Rick is left standing there with the body of his best friend, having beaten him in a fight he never wanted to have, unable to fix what was done. They do eventually reunite in Season 5, in the episode Rick-ternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort, where Rick enters Bird Person's mind to try to free him. This works. Bird Person is restored, but the wedding is still gone. Tammy's betrayal is still real. The Federation's reach into Rick's personal life, the place he thought was separate from all of it, still happened. Rick does not talk about this. He does not process it visibly or have a conversation where he admits what the loss of Bird Person cost him. He moves. He keeps going. He does the thing he always does. But the surrender at the end of Season 2 is still there in the record, still happened. Whatever story Rick tells about it afterward, the moment existed. Rick standing apart from his family, having heard that they might be safer without him, and deciding that their safety was worth more than his freedom. That is not the behavior of a man who believes nothing matters. That is not the behavior of a nihilist. That is the behavior of someone who loves people he cannot say he loves, who protects people he will not admit he is protecting, who goes to prison rather than watch his family get hurt, and then tells everyone it was all part of the plan. Rick's darkness and Rick's love are not opposites. They are the same thing, pointed in different directions depending on the day and the situation and how much of himself he has been able to keep hidden. And the parts of himself he hides most carefully are not the cruel parts. The cruelty is right on the surface, visible, performative, almost comfortable to watch because it is expected. What Rick hides is the softness, the parts that hurt, the parts that went to prison so Beth could live a normal life, even for a little while. The surrender happened. The love was real. The cover story came later. And the cover story only needed to exist because what Rick had done, what he keeps doing, across every season, in 100 different forms, was care about people in a way he has decided he is not allowed to. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That decision, the one that says caring is dangerous, that love is a liability, that the smart move is always to keep moving, is the decision the show interrogates most directly in the episode that follows this one, in terms of Rick's arc. Because Rick will eventually end up in a therapy office, covered covered in rat blood and feces, being told by a stranger in a calm voice the most accurate thing anyone has ever said to him. And his response to that accuracy will tell you everything. Section 6, Pickle Rick, the funniest episode about not wanting to be known. On August 6, 2017, Rick and Morty released what would become its most talked about episode. The internet lost its mind before it even aired. The Season 3 trailer had dropped a single image, Rick transformed into a pickle, screaming about it with everything he had, and the reaction was immediate and enormous. Fan art, memes, countdown threads. The kind of anticipation that builds around something that promises to be pure, uncomplicated fun. A genius scientist turned himself into a pickle. What could be more Rick and Morty than that? What could be more perfectly, joyfully absurd? The episode aired. People watched it. Pickle Rick became one of the most quoted, most referenced, most memed moments in the entire history of the show. The phrase, "I am Pickle Rick," entered the culture immediately and has basically never left. And almost everyone who repeated that phrase had just watched an episode about how Rick Sanchez turns his enormous intelligence into a weapon against his own well-being, uses it to avoid the one thing that could actually help him, and sits in a room with a therapist who sees through every single layer of the performance in about 4 minutes flat, and then does absolutely nothing with that information. That is the episode, not the pickle. The pickle is the point, but not in the way most people took it. Here is what actually happens in Season 3, Episode 3. The Smith family has been ordered into therapy by the school principal because of behavior problems with Morty and Summer. They have an appointment with a family therapist named Dr. Wong. Rick, who was supposed to attend, is not in the car when they leave. He is in the garage. He has turned himself into a pickle. Morty figures it out immediately. He finds a syringe sitting on a shelf, an anti-pickle serum, a cure, sitting right there within reach. He asks Rick if he put it there. Rick, who cannot move because he is a pickle with no arms or legs, tells Morty to flip him over and just appreciate the moment. He turned himself into a pickle, Morty. Boom. Big reveal. He is a pickle. Morty picks up the syringe and takes it to the car. Rick cannot follow. He cannot stop them. He cannot reach the syringe. He is a pickle. He has made himself physically helpless on purpose to avoid sitting in a room with a therapist, and the plan is already going wrong before the episode properly begins. What follows is genuinely entertaining. Rick surviving the rain, surviving the sewer, building himself a body out of rat parts and cockroach limbs, fighting his way through a government facility using nothing but a pickle brain and improvised weapons made from dead things. It is wild and clever, and the animation is excellent, and Rick's confidence throughout is completely absurdly intact. He kills dozens of trained guards. He takes down an entire operation. He does it as a pickle. It is, on the surface, a brilliant sequence. That is exactly what the show wants you to think. Because when Rick finally makes it to Dr. Wong's office, covered in rat blood, still technically a pickle, arriving at the therapy session he turned himself into a vegetable to avoid, the episode switches gears completely. Dr. Wong is not impressed by the pickle story. She listens, she takes it in, and then she starts talking, calmly and precisely, in a way that Rick has absolutely no answer to. She says, "Rick, the only connection between your unquestionable intelligence and the sickness destroying your family is that everyone in your family, you included, use intelligence to justify sickness." She keeps going. She says, "Rick seems to go back and forth between seeing his own mind as an unstoppable force and seeing it as a curse he cannot escape." She says she thinks it is because the one idea Rick truly cannot approach is that his mind is within his own control. She points out that he chose to come to the session. He chose to talk. He chose to turn himself into a pickle. He is the master of his own universe, and he is dripping with rat blood and feces, and his enormous mind has been, in her words, literally going to waste by his own hand. Then she says the line that lands hardest. "I have no doubt you would be the last man standing after an apocalypse, and perhaps the loneliest." Rick stares at her. The show holds on his face. His eyes do something they almost never do. They register. Not anger, not dismissal, not the performance of confidence. Something quieter. The look of a person who has just heard the truth said out loud by someone who is not supposed to be able to find it. He does not argue. He does not have a comeback. Rick Sanchez, who has a response to everything, who has talked his way out of Federation interrogations and galaxy-wide crises, and every personal conversation anyone has ever tried to have with him, sits there in silence. Dr. Wong finishes by saying that repairing things, maintaining things, cleaning things up, it is not an adventure. It is boring, the same way brushing your teeth is boring, but it is necessary. And Rick has decided that necessary things are beneath him. This speech is the most accurate thing anyone says to Rick across the entire run of the show. Not because it is mean or designed to hurt him. Dr. Wong does not raise her voice once. She is not angry. She is simply correct in in the flat, calm way that the truth often is when someone who knows what they are doing finally gets close enough to say it, and Rick knows she is right. The show makes this visible in a detail that is easy to miss. When the family gets back in the car afterward, Rick apologizes to Beth, sincerely. Not a joke apology, not a deflection dressed up as an apology. He looks at her and says he lied to get out of therapy, and he is sorry. Then he uses the syringe to turn himself back into a human. He is wearing a seatbelt, one of the very few times in the show he does this, which is a small, specific detail the show includes to signal that something landed, something got through. Then Beth starts talking about Dr. Wong, mocking her, calling her boring, making fun of the whole session. And Rick, who had the seatbelt on, who had just apologized for real, goes with it. He joins in. They make plans to go out drinking. In the back seat, Morty and Summer exchange a look. Both of them had wanted to go back to therapy. Both of them felt like it had helped. And the camera holds on their faces, doing a kind of quiet 1,000-yard stare as the adults in the front seat loudly laugh off the most honest conversation either of them has had in years. The ignored moment is the whole episode. Rick heard Dr. Wong. He registered it. He apologized. He put on a seatbelt. And then Beth gave him an exit. An easy, comfortable exit where he could rejoin the performance instead of staying in the truth. And he took it. Not because he is stupid. Not because he did not understand what Dr. Wong said. But because Beth's approval is a door Rick can always walk through. And walking through it meant he did not have to stay in the hard place Dr. Wong had just put him. The meme version of this episode, I Am Pickle Rick, takes the most visible, loudest, most chaotic part of the episode and uses it to mean something like pure energy, pure chaos, pure doing whatever you want. And that reading is almost perfectly backwards. Pickle Rick is an episode about what it looks like when a person uses everything they have, all their intelligence, all their creativity, all their capability to avoid a 1-hour appointment. The pickle is not a symbol of freedom. It is a symbol of how far Rick will go to not be known. Dr. Wong figures him out in the time it takes most people to get comfortable in a new chair. She does it without a portal gun, without genius-level intelligence, without any of the tools Rick uses to stay ahead of everything. She does it because she is good at her job. And Rick, for all his brilliance, is not actually that hard to read once someone decides to look directly at him instead of at the performance. The episode won an Emmy, specifically a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program. It is the first Emmy the show ever won. The episode that the industry decided best represented Rick and Morty at its highest level is the one where Rick turns himself into a pickle to dodge therapy, and a quiet woman in an office tells him the truth about himself, and he does exactly nothing with it. That is the joke. That is the real one, underneath all the rat killing and the pickle screaming and the cultural moment. The joke is that Rick is not actually that mysterious. The joke is that a therapist can see him clearly in 4 minutes. The joke is that he knows this and is terrified of it and has been running from it for decades. And the punchline is that he will keep running because the one adventure Rick Sanchez is genuinely not brave enough to go on is the one where he sits still long enough to actually be seen. Morty and Summer wanted to go back. They said so, quietly, in the back seat of that car while the adults laughed. Rick and Beth went drinking instead, and the pattern held. The same pattern that had held since the garage, since the Cronenbergs, since the night with the death ray. Rick getting close to something real, close enough to feel the heat of it, and then moving. Always moving. Because moving is the one thing he is genuinely the best in the universe at. But moving has a cost, and the cost gets paid by the people closest to him. Sometimes in ways that are hard to see, and sometimes in ways that are completely visible and completely deliberate, which is where things get genuinely dark in a way that cannot be blamed on grief or trauma or the weight of living an impossible life. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Sometimes Rick knows exactly what he is doing. Sometimes the cruelty is the point. And the clearest example of that is an episode about a fake vat of acid, a device that appeared to let Morty redo his mistakes, and a punishment so precise and so cold that it reveals something about Rick that the show had mostly kept hidden up until that point. Section 7. The Vat of Acid. Rick's cruelty with no villain to blame. Every dark thing Rick has done up to this point in the show has had something underneath it. The revenge quest had grief underneath it. The Cronenberg world had carelessness underneath it. Terrible, inexcusable carelessness, but carelessness rather than intent. The suicide attempt had heartbreak underneath it. The surrender to the Federation had love underneath it, even if Rick immediately covered that love with a story about strategy. Even the moments where Rick is genuinely cruel, where he uses people, dismisses them, treats them as tools. The show usually gives you enough context to understand understand what is driving it. The damage has a source. The behavior connects back to something that happened to him. Season 4, Episode 8, the Vat of Acid episode, removes that context entirely. What Rick does in this episode is not driven by grief. It is not a side effect of trauma. It is not carelessness or recklessness or the desperate behavior of someone trying to outrun their own pain. It is deliberate. It is calculated. It is cold. And the target is Morty, the person Rick has spent 4 seasons demonstrating in his own buried and complicated way that he genuinely loves. Rick does it because Morty laughed at him. Here is exactly what happens. The episode begins with Rick and Morty escaping from a group of criminals by jumping into a vat of acid. Rick had set this up in advance. The vat is fake, filled with a substance that looks like acid but is not, with an air supply at the bottom and hidden compartments and fake bones ready to scatter on the surface to convince anyone watching that they both died. It is an impressive, well-constructed plan. They escape. The criminals are fooled. Morty thinks the plan is stupid. He says so. He makes fun of it. He calls the whole acid vat idea unnecessarily complicated and points out that Rick could have just handled the situation differently without the elaborate fake death setup. He is not being cruel about it. He is a teenager, doing what teenagers do, mocking something, being a little dismissive, laughing at the absurdity of the situation. He does not understand what he has just done, which has wound Rick's pride in a specific, targeted way. Rick decides to teach him a lesson. He builds a device and gives it to Morty. He tells Morty it is a save point machine, like in a video game, where you can mark a moment in time and then return to it if things go wrong. If Morty makes a mistake, if something bad happens, if he wants to undo a decision, he just presses the button and everything resets to the last save point. Rick presents this as a gift. Morty is thrilled. What Morty does not know, what the audience does not know yet, is that the device does not actually save and reset anything. What it does is move Morty to a parallel dimension and kill the Morty who was already living there. Every time Morty presses the button, a version of him dies, and Morty steps into his life without knowing it. Rick knows this. Rick built it this way on purpose. Morty uses the device constantly. He uses it to fix small mistakes. He uses it to redo embarrassing moments. He uses it for fun. And then, at some point during this montage of resets, Morty is in a plane crash. He survives. So does one other person, a young woman. They are stranded together in snowy mountains, in the kind of situation where survival requires complete trust and complete cooperation. They keep each other alive. They go through genuine hardship together. Days pass, maybe weeks, and the shared experience of surviving something that terrible together builds something real between them. Morty falls in love with her. Not a crush, not the way he felt about Jessica back in season 1, something that grew out of real shared experience, real difficulty, real time spent with another person in circumstances where pretending is not possible. They are rescued, they come home, they start building a life together, then Jerry accidentally activates the device, the reset happens, everything goes back to Morty's last save point, which was before the plane crash, before the mountains, before the weeks of survival, before the relationship. His girlfriend does not remember him. The entire relationship, every moment of it, everything they went through, everything that grew between them is gone. Not metaphorically gone, structurally erased. She is standing in front of him and she has no idea who he is. Morty is destroyed by this. The show gives him a real moment of grief, not played for laughs, not softened by a joke, just Morty experiencing the specific horror of losing someone who is still right there and does not know they have been lost. And then Rick explains what the device actually does. He lays it out. The save points were never save points. Every reset killed a Morty in another dimension and moved this Morty into his life. All the fun resets, all the small fixes, all the times Morty pressed the button because something was mildly inconvenient, each one was a death. And the reset that erased the relationship erased it because Morty was moved into a dimension where that version of him had never been on that plane, had never met that woman, had never had those weeks in the mountains. Rick did not build the device as a gift. He built it as a trap. The entire thing, every reset, every death, every moment of genuine relationship that Morty built and then lost was Rick's punishment for Morty laughing at the acid vat plan. The episode does not stop there. Rick has one more move. When the truth comes out, the situation outside the house has escalated. Because of things Morty did across all the alternate dimensions while using the device, there is now a mob outside. Law enforcement, protesters, people Morty wronged in dimensions he passed through and does not remember. The only way to get rid of them, Rick tells Morty, is to use the fake acid vat. The same one Morty made fun of at the beginning of the episode. Morty has to climb in, fake his death, and hide at the bottom while Rick makes the whole situation go away. Morty has to use the stupid plan he laughed at. That is the final piece of the punishment. Rick designed the entire thing. The device, the resets, the lost relationship, the mob, job, all of it, so that it would end with Morty climbing into the acid vat and admitting, through the act of climbing in, that the plan was not stupid, that Rick was right. Morty gets into the vat. His girlfriend, who does not remember him, shows up at exactly that moment and sees him drop into the acid. She leaves in tears, believing he just killed himself in front of her. Rick watches all of this happen. He planned for all of this to happen. Now sit with what this actually required. For Rick's punishment to work the way it worked, he had to know in advance that Morty would use the device enough times that something serious would happen. He had to be willing to let Morty experience whatever consequences came from those resets, including the plane crash, including the weeks of survival, including falling in love. He had to be willing to let Morty build a real relationship with a real person, knowing that the device would eventually erase it, and that Morty would feel that loss as completely and as painfully as any loss can be felt. Rick let Morty fall in love so that he could take it away. He did not do this to teach Morty a lesson about respecting dangerous dimensions, or about the ethics of using alternate versions of yourself. He did it because Morty made fun of his plan. The punishment is so massively out of proportion to the thing that caused it that it stops being discipline and becomes something else. A demonstration of what Rick is capable of when his pride is touched. The show does not give Rick a defense here. There is no speech where Rick explains that it was actually good for Morty, or that the lesson needed to be learned this way. Rick knows what he did. The episode knows what he did, and the audience is left with it, with no villain to redirect toward, no larger threat to absorb the darkness into. This is Rick. Not Rick driven by grief, not Rick damaged by what was done to him, not Rick performing nihilism to keep the pain at a distance. This is Rick choosing to hurt someone he loves, methodically and in advance, because he felt disrespected. The intelligence that makes him the most capable being in the central finite curve is the same intelligence he used to engineer months of Morty's emotional life and then erase them. The detail that connects this back to the larger picture of Rick's darkness is the one the show plants quietly. Rick Prime, the man who killed Diane and Beth, killed them because Rick C-137 refused to do what Rick Prime wanted. He felt dismissed. He felt disrespected by the refusal. And the response to that disrespect was a bomb through a portal that destroyed a family. Rick C-137 had Morty's emotional life destroyed because Morty laughed at a plan. The scale is completely different. Nobody dies in the vat of acid episode, but the logic is the same. A Rick, feeling that his capabilities have been questioned or dismissed, responding with a punishment designed to be total and precise and impossible to argue with. Rick hates Rick Prime. The show has made that completely clear. Rick spent decades hunting him across the multiverse, and Rick, in Season 4, used the same internal logic as the man he spent decades hunting. That is not a coincidence. That is the show being honest about what trauma and intelligence and unchecked power actually do to a person over time. It does not just hurt them, it shapes them. It teaches them, slowly and without their awareness, that overwhelming responses to small offenses are normal, that making sure you win completely is the only acceptable outcome, that the people around you exist, in some functional sense, within the universe you have created. And if they step outside the rules of that universe, the consequences are yours to decide. Rick Prime told Rick he made him. He showed him infinity. In the Vat of Acid episode, you can see exactly what that making produced. Not in the big dramatic moments, in the quiet, deliberate, completely planned punishment of a 14-year-old boy who laughed at the wrong time. The relationship Morty lost was real. The grief he felt when it disappeared was real. The woman who walked away thinking he had died in front of her was real, in whatever dimension she existed in. Rick built all of that, arranged all of that, let all of that happen. And when Morty climbed into the acid vat at the end, Rick watched. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What makes this even harder to sit with is that this is not the only way Rick controls and shapes the world around Morty. It is the most visible example. It is the one the show puts in front of you directly and asks you to look at without flinching. But there is an entire room beneath the garage, one Rick has been building for years, that tells a much longer story about the way Rick manages what Morty is allowed to know, what Morty is allowed to remember, and just how much of Morty's life has been quietly arranged by hands Morty never knew were there. Section 8. Morty's Mindblowers. The room beneath the garage Rick never wanted found. Most secrets in Rick and Morty are loud. The Cronenberg world was loud. The suicide attempt had a song over it. The Federation prison had a season finale built around it. Even the origin story, Diane, Beth, the bomb, when it finally came with a full memory sequence and an evil Morty revelation, and the weight of 5 seasons of buildup. The show is not subtle about its big moments. It tends to lean into them, let the music do its work, let the images sit long enough to register. Season 3, Episode 8, Morty's Mindblowers, hides its biggest secret in a room, a literal room, beneath the garage, behind a door that Rick has never shown anyone, that exists in the same building where Rick does all his inventing and drinking and pretending that everything is fine. The room is full of small glass tubes, hundreds of them, each one glowing slightly, each one labeled, each one containing a memory that was removed from Morty's mind. Not stolen, removed, at Morty's request. That is the detail Rick uses when he finally shows Morty the room. Morty asked for all of these to be taken out. He could not handle them, did not want them, begged Rick to make them go away. And Rick, who has the technology to do exactly that, obliged every single time. This is true. The show confirms it. Morty did ask. The memories in the room are ones Morty chose to give up, but the room is bigger than that. And the further you get into the episode, the more complicated the truth becomes. Here is how the episode begins. Rick and Morty are running from a strange creature in a world that looks like an impossible staircase going in every direction at once. Morty is holding a small, turtle-like animal called the truth tortoise. Rick told him not to look at it. Morty looked at it. Whatever the truth tortoise shows a person when they look at it is so overwhelming that Morty immediately drops it into a void and the whole world collapses. They escape. They come home. Morty has a memory looping in his head that he cannot get rid of.
He does not know where it came from or what it means, but it will not stop replaying. He asks Rick to take it out. Rick leads him to the secret room beneath the garage, extracts the looping memory, files it away in a tube, and is about to close the room back up when Morty starts looking around. He sees his name on hundreds of tubes. He asks what they all are. Rick tells him, "These are memories Morty asked to have removed. Every tube is a moment from an adventure that Morty found too painful, too frightening, too confusing, or too disturbing to keep living with. Rick took them out. He filed them here. He kept them in this room in case Morty ever wanted them back." Though the show makes clear that most people who ask for memories to be removed never want them back, because the reason you remove a memory is that having it is unbearable. Then things go wrong. The memories start replaying outside the tubes. Rick and Morty start watching them, and what the memories show is a picture of their adventures that is darker and more disturbing than almost anything the show had put on screen up to that point. One memory shows Morty looking through a telescope and seeing a man on the moon, a small, ordinary-looking man with a mustache, who appears to live there, who stares back at Morty through the telescope. Morty becomes convinced this is a massive cover-up, that the existence of this man has been hidden from the public. He goes to the news. He tells people. He pushes hard enough and long enough that the story reaches a level where it cannot be ignored. And then Rick reveals the truth. The man on the moon is not part of a cover-up. He is just a man who lives on the moon. There is no conspiracy. Morty destroyed his own credibility and caused real damage to people around him because he assumed that something unusual must mean something sinister. Rick let it happen. He watched Morty spiral. He did not stop it until the damage was done. Then he removed the memory so Morty would not have to live with the embarrassment. Another memory is significantly darker. An alien has kidnapped Beth and is forcing her to make a choice. She can save Morty or she can save Summer, but not both. This is the kind of scenario designed to be impossible. The kind that is supposed to reveal something true about a person when they are under that kind of pressure. Beth makes her choice immediately. She says Summer's name without hesitating. Rick arrives and saves both of them. The crisis ends. But what cannot be unfound is that Beth, in the moment when she thought she could only save one of her children, did not choose Morty. She chose Summer, instantly, without a pause. The show does not make a huge moment out of this. It moves on. But the memory is in Morty's tube collection, which means at some point Morty was carrying this knowledge, that his mother made that choice and could not bear to keep living with it. He asked Rick to take it out, and Rick did. Rick knew about this. Rick watched it happen. Rick has been carrying this information in this room for however long the tube has been sitting on that shelf. There is another memory that changes the shape of everything else. In it, Rick and Morty are in a situation where Morty does something that gets a group of people killed, not through malice, through a mistake, but the people are dead and the mistake is Morty's. Rick, rather than helping Morty process what happened, extracts the memory immediately. He removes the weight of it before Morty can fully feel it. He files it away in the room and sends Morty back into the world clean. This sounds like kindness, and on one level it is. Rick is protecting Morty from a level of guilt that might genuinely break him. But on another level, what Rick is doing is making sure that Morty never has to grow from that experience. The memory is not just a painful thing. It is information. It is knowledge about what Morty is capable of and what consequences can look like. By removing it, Rick keeps Morty in a state of innocence that is partly genuine and partly manufactured. He keeps the version of Morty that is useful to him, eager, willing, not yet cynical enough to stop showing up, intact. The room is not just storage, it is maintenance. Then the episode reveals
reveals its final, deepest layer. While Rick and Morty are watching memories, and things are starting to go wrong, the memories getting mixed up, both of them losing track of what is real, they accidentally wipe each other. Not just one memory, all of them. Rick and Morty both end up on the couch, completely blank, with no idea who they are, where they are, or what is happening. They panic, they fight, they have no context for anything. Summer finds them. She goes to the room. She finds instructions that Rick left for exactly this situation. A step-by-step guide for what to do if both Rick and Morty ever accidentally wiped each other completely. The instructions walk her through how to reset them both to baseline using a specific set of memories that Rick had pre-selected and stored separately. This is the detail that matters most in the entire episode. Rick built a contingency for the scenario where both of them forget everything. Not just Morty, both of them. Which means Rick anticipated that this specific failure was possible, that the memory room could malfunction in exactly this way. And rather than tell Morty about it, or build a safeguard that would prevent it, he wrote instructions for Summer and trusted that she would find them and follow them. Summer is the contingency, not Morty. Rick trusted Morty's sister, not Morty, with the knowledge of how to put them both back together. There is only one reason to make that choice.
Rick does not tell Morty about the contingency because Morty knowing about it would mean Morty knowing about the room in full, not just as a place where painful memories go, but as a system Rick has been running, quietly, on Morty's mind for years. If Morty knew the full scope of it, he might ask questions that Rick does not want to answer. Questions like, how many of these tubes are here because Morty asked, and how many are here because Rick decided? Questions like whether the line between the two has always been as clear as Rick claims. The show does not answer these questions directly. It raises them and moves on, the way it often does with its darkest implications, surfacing them just long enough for the audience to feel the weight, then covering them back up with the next joke or the next adventure. But the room exists, the contingency exists, the hundreds of tubes exist, and the fact that Rick has been managing Morty's memory carefully, systematically, with enough foresight to write instructions for when it all breaks down, exists alongside everything else the show has shown about the way Rick relates to the people he loves. He cannot love without controlling. He cannot protect without also managing. Every act of genuine care he performs comes attached to something else. A decision about what Morty is allowed to know, what Morty is allowed to remember, what version of Morty is allowed to exist going forward. Rick does not do this because he is evil. He does it because he is Rick. And Rick has decided, somewhere deep beneath the drinking and the performance, that the people around him are safest when they are arranged the way he needs them to be. The memory room is the vat of acid made invisible. In the vat of acid episode, you can see what Rick is doing. The cruelty is visible, laid out plainly, impossible to miss. In the memory room, the control is hidden behind care, behind the genuine fact that Morty asked, behind the tubes and the labels and the orderly filing system of a man who has been doing this long enough to get organized about it. Both are Rick, the visible cruelty and the hidden management, the punishment and the protection. They come from the same place, the belief that Rick knows better than anyone else what the world around him should look like, and the willingness to use every tool available to make sure it looks that way. Morty has been living, for the entire run of the show, inside a reality that Rick has been quietly editing. The adventures were real, the danger was real, the growth was real, as much as growth can be real when the person growing does not have access to all the information about their own history. But underneath all of it, in a room that Morty did not know was there until Season 3, Episode 8, Rick has been keeping receipts, organizing them, filing them carefully in glowing tubes on a shelf, and the shelf goes all the way to the ceiling. What makes this connect directly to the largest, most architectural piece of Rick's darkness, the thing that is bigger than any single episode, bigger than any single relationship, is what the memory room represents at scale. Rick does not just manage Morty's memory. He has arranged the entire multiverse around a specific idea, a specific need. The need to always be the most capable, most powerful, most important presence in whatever space he occupies. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the name of the structure he built to make sure of that is the central finite curve, which turns out to be the loneliest thing Rick has ever made. Section 9, the central finite curve, the loneliest thing Rick ever built. Evil Morty does not want power. That is the thing most people miss about him when they first encounter his plan. He has power. By the end of Season 5, he is the elected president of the Citadel of Ricks, the most powerful position in an institution full of the most capable beings in the multiverse. He has resources,
influence, an army, and the kind of intelligence that comes from being a Morty who decided somewhere along the way to stop being what Ricks need Mortys to be. He is not lacking anything that power can provide.
What he wants is out. Not out of the Citadel specifically, not out of any particular situation or relationship or conflict. He wants out of a structure, a fundamental, invisible architecture that has been shaping the entire multiverse the whole time the show has been running, that most people who live inside it do not even know exists. He wants to escape the central finite curve, and to understand why that matters, and why it is one of the darkest things the show has ever revealed about Rick, you have to understand what the central finite curve actually is. The multiverse in Rick and Morty is genuinely infinite. Not almost infinite, not very large. Infinite, in the real sense of the word. Every possible version of every possible reality, existing simultaneously, with no upper limit on how strange or how different those realities can get. There are dimensions where humans never evolved. Dimensions where the laws of physics work differently. Dimensions where Rick Sanchez never existed at all. Dimensions where he existed but never became what he became. The multiverse is everything, all at once, with no organizing principle and no ceiling. The central finite curve is a wall built inside that infinity. It is a subset, a carefully selected portion of the infinite multiverse, cut off from the rest by a barrier that Rick created. Every dimension inside the curve shares one specific characteristic. In every single reality within the curve, Rick Sanchez is the smartest being alive. Not just smart, the smartest, the most capable, the one whose intelligence outranks everything else in his universe. Outside the curve, that is not guaranteed.
Outside the curve, there are realities where Rick is ordinary, realities where someone else is smarter, realities where Rick's genius, which is the thing he has built his entire identity around, the thing that survived when everything else was taken from him, does not make him special. Those realities exist. The curve just makes sure Rick never has to visit them. This is confirmed in Season 5, Episode 10, Rick Mirai Jack, when Evil Morty explains it as part of his plan to destroy the curve and escape it. Evil Morty lays out what the curve is with complete clarity. He explains that Rick built a prison masquerading as a playground. He explains that every Rick inside the curve is the most powerful person in his universe, and that this is not a coincidence. It is a design choice. Rick designed the multiverse that Ricks get to travel to be one where Ricks always win. Evil Morty escapes. He destroys the curve on his way out. The last image of him in the series, standing at the edge of the curve's barrier, looking out into the infinite multiverse beyond it, a rainbow of impossible colors spreading out in front of him, is one of the most visually striking things the show has produced. He steps through. He is gone. And the question he leaves behind is the one that the curve forces you to ask. Why did Rick build it? The show does not give one clean answer to this. It gives you the pieces and lets you put them together. And the pieces, when you line them up next to everything else the show has revealed about Rick across 5 seasons, point in a direction that is much sadder than it first appears. The most practical answer, the one that is closest to the surface, is that Rick built the curve during his revenge quest. He was hunting Rick Prime. He needed to narrow down the search. An infinite multiverse is impossible to search. A finite subset, even a very large one, is at least theoretically manageable.
By defining the curve as every dimension where Rick is the smartest being alive, Rick eliminated every dimension where Rick Prime, who is also a Rick, who is also defined by his intelligence, could not exist. It was a search filter, a way to make the impossible hunt slightly less impossible. This is believable. It fits with what we know about Rick's intelligence and his approach to problems. He turns everything into a system. He engineers solutions at a scale most people cannot even imagine. Building a wall around a portion of the multiverse to use as a hunting ground is exactly the kind of thing Rick would do. But there is another layer underneath the practical one, and this layer is darker and more honest. Rick built the curve after losing Diane. After his identity as a husband and a father, the identity he had chosen over the multiverse when Rick Prime offered him the trade, was destroyed. What he had left after the bomb was his intelligence, his genius, the one thing that nobody could take from him because it lived inside his own mind. And the revenge quest, for all its violence and all its failure, was also the period during which Rick fully became what he is, the most dangerous, most capable, most untouchable Rick in existence, the Rickest Rick. The curve is what happens when you take that identity and build a home for it, a home where it is always true, where no matter what dimension you step into, the fundamental fact of who Rick is, the thing that makes him Rick rather than anyone else, is guaranteed to be valid. You cannot take his wife from him again inside the curve, because inside the curve, he is already the most powerful thing in the room. You cannot make him ordinary. You cannot make him small. The curve is a structure built to make make sure that what happened in that garage in C-137 can never fully define him, because inside the curve, he is always defined by something else first. It is also a prison. Evil Morty is right about this. Every Rick inside the curve is trapped in a version of the multiverse that has been curated to make them feel important. Every adventure Rick goes on, every dimension he visits, every enemy he faces, all of it takes place inside a bubble that Rick himself designed to keep him comfortable. The infinite strangeness of the real multiverse, the parts that exist beyond the curve's wall, are entirely inaccessible to him. Not because he cannot reach them, because he walled them off. Mr. Nimbus, Rick's self-proclaimed nemesis, who appears in Season 5, Episode 1, says something to Rick that the show frames as an insult, but is actually a diagnosis. He tells Rick that he used to fear him, used to respect him, and now all that is left is pity for a sad, drunk shell of a man too afraid to see how alone he truly is. Then he starts to mention Diane. He gets her name out before Rick cuts him off, and Rick's reaction to just the sound of her name is immediate and physical. He does not let Nimbus finish the sentence. Nimbus knew Rick when he was younger. He knew Rick before the bomb, before the revenge quest, before the curve. He has watched the man Rick became, and he sees it clearly. Not a genius living freely across an infinite multiverse, but a person who built a wall around himself at the scale of reality itself, and called it freedom, and has been drinking inside it ever since. The loneliness of the curve is not just that Rick is alone inside it. He has his family. He has Morty. He has adventures constantly. The loneliness is structural. Every relationship Rick has inside the curve exists within a space where Rick is always the most powerful presence. There is no one who can challenge him at the level he actually needs to be challenged. There is no dimension he can visit where he might be wrong in a way that matters. The curve guarantees his superiority, and in doing so, makes genuine connection, the kind that can only happen between equals, or at least between people who can actually threaten each other. Impossible. Rick built the most elaborate loneliness machine in the history of fiction, and he lives in it voluntarily. The detail that makes this fully devastating is the one about why Rick never found a dimension with a living Diane. After the bomb, after Rick Prime used the Omega device to erase Diane from every dimension across the multiverse, there are no Dianes left anywhere. But the Omega device came later. During the early part of the revenge quest, there would have been dimensions where Diane was alive, dimensions where the bomb never came, where the garage was never destroyed, where Rick C-137's original life was still intact. He did not go to those dimensions. The reason given by the show, across multiple sources, is that the revenge quest required Rick to focus on dimensions where Rick Prime could be hiding, and Rick Prime would not be hiding in dimensions where Diane was alive, because those were the dimensions his bomb did not reach. So by choosing the hunt over everything else, Rick also chose to exclude the only places where some version of his wife still existed. He chose revenge over Diane, not because he loved her less than he hated Rick Prime, because the revenge had become the identity. The hunt had become the structure that held him together, and stepping into a dimension with a living Diane would have meant stepping into the life he lost, which would have meant feeling the loss of it, which was the one thing Rick had decided he would not survive. So the curve, when you look at it from every angle, is not just a search tool and not just a pride structure. It is also a way of making sure Rick never accidentally ends up somewhere that forces him to feel the thing he has been running from since the bomb. Inside the curve, Diane is always already gone. The loss is always already the background condition. There is no dimension to stumble into where she is alive, and he has to decide what to do about that. The curve protects him from his own grief, at the cost of locking him inside a version of the multiverse that can never fully surprise him, never fully challenge him, never give him back the thing the bomb took. Rick Prime told Rick he showed him infinity. The central finite curve is Rick's answer to that. He took the infinity he was shown, and he drew a box around the part of it where he is always the most important thing in the room. And then he moved into the box, and he called it home, and he has been there ever since. The most capable being in a carefully selected portion of existence, drinking in a garage that was never originally his. That is the loneliest thing the show has ever shown. Not the suicide attempt, not the garage with the death ray, not the bodies in the backyard. The loneliest thing is a man who had the entire multiverse available to him and built a smaller one to live in, because the full infinite version had too many places where he might not be okay. Evil Morty got out. He walked through the wall and into the real multiverse, and the show never showed him again, because what he found out there is beyond the frame of a story about Rick. Rick stayed inside. He has always stayed inside. That is the pattern across every section of this essay. Rick finding the version of the situation that requires the least amount of genuine vulnerability and moving into it and calling it a choice. The curve is just that pattern at the largest possible scale. But the curve is also what eventually leads Rick to the moment he has been building toward since the bomb fell through the portal, because evil Morty's destruction of the curve and the events it sets in motion are what bring Rick Prime out into the open, what make him findable, what give Rick C-137 the one thing the revenge quest never gave him: a clear shot. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And what happens when Rick finally gets that clear shot? What it costs, what it gives him, and what is left when it is over, is the end of the story this whole essay has been building toward. Section 10. Unmortricken. The day Rick got what he wanted, and it meant nothing. For 7 seasons, Rick Sanchez has been moving toward one moment. Everything connects back to it. The portal gun he built out of grief, the decades of killing ultimate versions of himself across the multiverse, the central finite curve he drew around a portion of reality to narrow the search, the drinking, the performance of not caring, the suicide attempt in the garage, the bodies in the backyard, the memory room beneath the floor, the surrender to the Federation. Every dark thing this essay has covered, every moment where the weight of who Rick is became briefly visible through the cracks in who Rick performs being, all of it has been pointing the entire time toward one specific face: Rick Prime, the man who threw the bomb, the man who took Diane, the man who took Beth, the man who, according to Season 7's Unmortricken, eventually used the Omega device to erase Diane from every dimension in existence so that no version of her could survive anywhere in the multiverse. The man Rick C-137 spent the most important years of his life hunting without ever being able to find. Season 7, Episode 5 is called Unmortricken. It is the episode where Rick finally catches him. Here is exactly how it happens. The season had been building toward this quietly. Evil Morty, before escaping through the central finite curve at the end of Season 5, had been gathering information. He scanned Rick's brain. He studied the schematics of the Omega device, the weapon Rick Prime built to erase people from every dimension simultaneously. Evil Morty took those schematics when he left. He had plans for them. And in Season 7, those plans intersect with Rick's hunt in a way neither of them fully anticipated. Evil Morty reaches out to Rick. He has found Rick Prime. He knows where he is. And he is willing to share that information, but only if Rick agrees to work with him, because Evil Morty needs Rick's help to get close enough to Prime to execute his own plan, which involves the Omega device schematics and something Evil Morty wants to do that the show does not fully reveal until the moment it happens. Rick agrees. He and Evil Morty form a temporary alliance, which is one of the strangest pairings the show has ever put together. The Rick who has spent the series being the main character, carrying all the grief and all the damage, and the Morty who looked at the system built around Rick's and Morty's and decided to burn it down rather than live inside it. Two people who cannot trust each other, working together toward goals that only partially overlap, because the thing they both need is in the same place. They find Rick Prime. The confrontation is not what most people who had been anticipating it for seasons probably imagined. Rick Prime is not presented as an unstoppable force. He is not given a dramatic entrance or a speech about his power. He is found and captured and brought to a position where Rick C-137 has complete control over what happens next. Evil Morty, using what he gathered from Rick's brain scan and the Omega device schematics, handles the technical side. Rick Prime ends up restrained. At Rick C-137's mercy, and Rick Prime, even restrained and beaten, does what he always does. He talks. He tells Rick C-137 directly, "You are welcome. I made you. I showed you infinity." This is not a random taunt. It is a specific claim, and the show takes it seriously enough to not immediately contradict it. Rick Prime is saying that the person Rick C-137 became, the most dangerous Rick in the multiverse, the Rickest Rick, the man who built the central finite curve and survived decades of hunting and became the thing other Ricks feared, would not exist without the bomb, without Diane's death, without the destruction of everything Rick had chosen over the multiverse when Rick Prime first offered the trade. Rick Prime is saying that by taking everything from Rick, he gave him everything that Rick actually became. Rick C-137 beats him to death, not with a weapon, not with a device or a piece of technology, or any of the brilliant tools Rick has access to, with his hands. It is ugly, and it is direct, and it is the most human thing Rick does in the entire series, using his body, using physical force, in a way that has nothing to do with genius, and everything to do with rage and grief, and the specific kind of violence that only comes from something that has been building for a
very long time, finally reaching the surface. Evil Morty watches. He lets it happen. When it is over, he takes Rick Prime's Omega device schematics, the thing he came for, the real reason he agreed to the alliance, and he leaves. He gives Rick the moment. He does not try to stop it or redirect it. He understands what this is for Rick, even if he does not particularly care about it. Rick Prime is dead. It is done. And then the show does something that is braver and more honest than a clean ending. It shows you what comes after. There is no release, no wave of peace washing over Rick as the thing that defined his life for decades finally stops existing. No moment where the weight lifts and Rick is suddenly free to be a different person. He is standing in whatever space the confrontation happened in, and Rick Prime is dead, and evil Morty is gone, and Rick is alone with the fact that the mission is over. He does not know what to do next. This is the detail that makes Unmortricken the most genuinely dark episode in the entire show's run, in a way that is completely different from all the other dark moments this essay has covered. The suicide attempt was dark because of what it revealed about Rick's pain. The Cronenberg world was dark because of what it revealed about Rick's relationship to consequences. The vat of acid was dark because of what it revealed about Rick's cruelty. Unmortricken is dark because of what it reveals about what Rick was actually living for. The revenge was not just a mission, it was a structure. It organized everything. It gave the drinking a reason. You drink when you are in pain. And Rick was in pain because of what Rick Prime did, and because Rick Prime was still out there unpunished. It gave the adventures a context. Rick, moving through the multiverse, dangerous and brilliant and always in motion, made a kind of sense when there was something he was ultimately moving toward. It gave his identity as the Rickest Rick a purpose. Being the most capable being in the central finite curve was the qualification required to eventually catch the man who destroyed his family. Take the revenge away, and the structure it was holding up becomes visible. The drinking is just drinking. The motion is just motion. The identity is just a performance that has been running so long it has almost become real. Rick Prime told him the truth before he died. He did make Rick C-137. Not in the sense that Rick C-137 should be grateful. The man took Diane, took Beth, erased Diane from every dimension, and spent years one step ahead of a grief-driven hunt. There is nothing to be grateful for. But in the sense that the specific shape of who Rick became, the Rickest Rick, the man the Citadel feared, the man who built the curve, the man who kept going through suicide attempts and heartbreak and failed hunts and decades of loneliness, that shape was carved by the bomb, by the loss, by the specific damage Rick Prime inflicted. Rick C-137 is what he is because of what was done to him. And now the person who did it is gone. And Rick has to figure out, for the first time in decades, who he is when he is not defined by what happened to him. The season does not let this resolution be clean or simple. In the episodes following Unmortricken, Rick does not suddenly become emotionally available or honest or free from the patterns that have defined him across 7 seasons. He does not sit down with the family and have the conversation that 7 seasons of watching him have made you want him to have. He keeps going. He keeps moving. The patterns hold. But something has shifted, quietly, in the way that the most important shifts in real people tend to happen. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small adjustments that are only visible if you have been watching carefully. Rick is more present with Morty after Unmortricken, not transformed, not suddenly the grandfather figure the Smith family deserved from the beginning, but slightly less defended, slightly more there. The show tracks this across the back half of Season 7 in ways that are easy to miss if you are not looking for them. Moments where Rick does not immediately deflect, where he lets something land instead of moving before it can touch him, where the performance of not caring drops for a half a second, and what is underneath is not another performance, but something quieter and less certain. The Season 7 finale, Fear No Mort, lands on Morty rather than Rick. It is an episode that takes place almost entirely inside Morty's mind, revealing that Morty's deepest fear is being abandoned by Rick. Not any of the dangers they have faced, not death or pain or the loss of the people he loves. Rick leaving. Rick deciding that Morty is not worth keeping around. That is the thing that lives at the center of Morty's fear. The thing that all the adventures and all the damage and all the years in the garage have built. And the episode reveals, quietly, that Rick has been making progress. That the man Morty is afraid of losing has been, in the back half of Season 7, becoming someone slightly more worth keeping, slightly more present, slightly less determined to make sure nobody gets close enough to see him. Morty cannot see this. That is the bittersweet ending the show gives the season. Rick is changing, slowly, in the way that people who have carried enormous weight for a very long time change when some of the weight is finally removed. But Morty, who has spent his entire relationship with Rick learning to interpret the performance rather than the person, cannot read the new signals. He sees Rick and still sees the man who might leave, still fears the abandonment that has always felt possible. Rick's progress is real. Morty's fear is also real, and they exist simultaneously, in the same family, in the same garage, with neither of them quite able to reach across the gap and say the thing that would actually help. This is where the show leaves them at the end of season 7. Not resolved, not broken. Somewhere in the complicated middle space that real relationships, even the ones between geniuses and their grandsons, even the ones built on manipulation and memory rooms and acid vats and the shared trauma of burying your own bodies in a backyard, tend to actually live in. Rick Prime told Rick he showed him infinity. He was not wrong. He showed Rick the full scope of what existence can take from a person and what a person can become in response to that taking. He showed Rick a version of himself that Rick would never have found any other way. Harder, more capable, more alone, more damaged, more brilliant, more defensive, more genuinely dangerous than the young scientist in the garage ever would have been. What Rick does with that version of himself now that the reason for it is gone, whether the patterns hold or whether something slowly, incrementally changes, is the question Season 8 inherits. The bomb fell in that garage decades ago. The ripples from it have been running through the entire show, through every dark moment this essay has examined, through every drink and every abandoned world and every erased memory and every fake death and every real one. Rick Prime is gone. The ripples are still going. And Rick Sanchez is still in the garage, still drinking, still moving, still performing, not caring about the people 3 rooms away who are the only reason he came back after the hunt failed and the curve closed in and the garage in C-137 got very quiet. Still there. That might be the most important thing the show has told us about him. After everything, after all of it, he is still there. In the garage that was never originally his, with the family that was never originally his, in a dimension he moved into because his own was gone and he needed somewhere to land. He stayed through all of it, through every dark turn this essay has traced from the beginning. He stayed. That is not nothing. For Rick Sanchez, it might be everything. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.